Hello, my name is David T. Chapman, and I'm going to share my program called Exploring the Birds of Ontario 2. This program has some fun facts, interesting moments, as well as tips on how you can view the birds as well too. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the show. We are starting off exploring the birds of Ontario 2 with the indigo bunting. So you saw the mature male there. Here's the first year male, and then of course the female as well too. So very beautiful blue. Basically the only wavelength of light that doesn't cut through is blue. And if you ever see these or hear a group of songs that the indigo bunting is singing, generally look for more. There's typically more than one. And then of course we have the scarlet tanager. Scarlet tanager has brilliant red. It is the only tanager that nests basically in northeast North America. So it is one to keep an eye out for because there's about 200 of them in the tropics alone. Then there's the orchard oriole. So we all know about the northern oriole, or Baltimore oriole is another name for that one. Well, there is the smaller orchard oriole as well too that comes up in the southern parts of Ontario. And there's the close relative of it there with the northern oriole. So you can see the comparison there. And they do kind of look funny when they're wet as well too. Of course, there's the rose-breasted grosbeak, and you'll see them flying in the upper parts of the canopy as well too, especially from tree to tree. In colder weather, they will come down and eat lower, and that will give you a chance to look at them as well as feeders in the backyard. And there's the less colorful female there as well too, which is great for hiding or staying out of sight on the nest. Then there's the eastern bluebird, another one. Some people say the indigo bunting should have been called the bluebird, but you can see here very much a character similar to the robin, basically eats meat, so insects, grubs, and so on. And you'll see them swoop down at times off a fence post or out of the tree and go after some food. There's the red-headed woodpecker. They often will set up on a perch and swoop down. Then there's the yellow-bellied sapsucker. The yellow-bellied sapsucker is one that actually makes holes in trees where the sap will leak into it. It attracts bugs, and it'll enjoy basically both the sugary taste as well as the meat, the protein from the insects that it's eating. So you can really see that they've basically been able to make their dinner plate very accessible, and it actually helps out other birds as well too. Then there's the red-bellied woodpecker. The red-bellied woodpecker is into Ontario and expanding northward, but is actually considered a pest in the southeast, where they'll actually eat oranges and other fruit basically, and that. So it is considered a pest in some areas. Still a beauty up in Ontario and northeast the United States there. Then we have the downy woodpecker. The downy woodpecker is generally the first one that we all get to meet, and it's smaller than the hairy woodpecker. So the hairy woodpecker is one that looks very, very similar to the downy, just is larger, as you can see here. And their bill, you can see, is much more notably longer, closer to the head size, whereas the downy is more stubby in a way. And then there's the northern flicker, which is widespread across most of northeast and southeast North America. Beautiful yellow tail feathers on the back, and they love to feast on ants. So when they feast on ants in the yard, you often see them just sit in that spot, and they'll just keep eating and basically feed completely on them until they're gone. And then there's the pileated woodpecker, or pileated woodpecker, depending on how you talk about it. It is the largest in North America. And then of course there's the red-breasted nuthatch. The red-breasted nuthatch is very enjoyable to watch. They'll go up and down the trees. And then of course the evening grosbeak. The evening grosbeak is an eruptive species that is across the boreal forest. So they will, some years you may not see them, or many years you may not see them, but then they'll erupt further southward. And they're a very brilliant yellow, comparable to the American goldfinch. And then the pine grosbeak, so very similar territory, basically the boreal forest, and they will go across. And if there's crop shortages, that is when they migrate south. And so that's a good time to see them, is when there's an eruptive year. And again, sunflower seed in the backyard is a great way to attract them. And the male tends to be more red, female tends to be kind of a yellow, and there is actually an orange variant as well too. And then there's the brown creeper. The brown creeper is one that will actually go start at the bottom of the tree and work its way up, and then you'll see it kind of swoop back down and then work its way up again. And it uses that slender bill and tongue to basically reach in and get the insects in the crevices and that of the bark. The purple martin is one communal bird. Basically it will nest in a kind of what we call martin condos. So you may see those at parks, especially near water, but they have tremendous aerobatics as they feed on many insects and that. So it's basically a very heavy protein diet as well for them. Then there's the tree swallow. So you can see them in kind of similar territory as the purple martin. I often see them together, but you also will see them in bluebird boxes, or there's even boxes for them now as well too. So open fields, anywhere that you see open fields, you can even have them in your backyard, set up a few boxes, especially if you live in the country, and they will possibly come out to your yard and nest in the spring. There's the northern rough-legged swallow, or rough-winged swallow, and also the barn swallow. And so you can see the barn swallow here. They're thought of as something that nests in barn, but they actually just man-made structures tends to be a lot of what they'll do. So you'll see them in barns, but also bridges, as well as picnic areas where you have a kind of a gazebo effect. You can find them in there as well too. We have the pine siskin. So the pine siskin likes to feed on Niger seed. One of the things that I set up for finches is basically Niger seed, because it brings in the pine siskin, as well as the American goldfinch love the Niger seed. And then we have the Bohemian waxwing, which when they come down further south, they will also go into, you'll see them in large groups and feeding on crab apples and things like that. So we're going to take a look at some of the habits here of the eastern bluebird. So you can see here the beautiful coloration, and the female has a very striking blue to it as well, just a little bit more pale. But basically they'll kind of perch up higher, and then they'll, if they spot something, they'll swoop down and potentially feed on it. And again, there's the eastern bluebird boxes because of the fact that basically years ago the house sparrow and European starling was introduced into the area, and that they're much more aggressive birds. So that's why we had to come out with the boxes to basically help them get their breeding numbers up again, give them better habitat. And then here's a purple martin condo here, and like I said, it's best to have them around water if you're going to set one up, but you'll often see them in one of these construction area, one of these buildings, and basically it will house them, but also can do house sparrows as well too. And then there's tree swallows, and you don't think of them as having to really battle for great habitat, but this video that you're watching now will show you great examples of that, where they're competing with other tree swallows to protect their nesting box here that they're interested in breeding and have little ones in. So as you can see here, it seems to be there's battles at times, and there was actually, amazingly, some blood was drawn on them as well too. So it is quite competitive, and you would think with all the boxes out there that there'd be plenty for them, but in that case not very much. And here I'm just showing you kind of some bloopers where basically you hit record and the birds disappear, so you don't get very long. Or at times you have your blind move in front of you, or you switch birds like I did here. You have the female cardinal, and then you get the house finch afterwards. So the common loon is Ontario's bird. It's their provincial bird, and we see a lot of them in their breeding colors, but this is them in their actual non-breeding colors in the fall. As you can see, the fall colors reflecting in the background. And they do actually have a very solid bone structure. Most ducks sit up higher because their bones are hollow, whereas when it comes to the common loon, they actually have denser bones, so it allows them to dive very deep. Also, it's why they sit lower in the water as well. So here you're seeing basically a feeding technique where the water's not that deep, so it kind of has to move more horizontally than diving downward. And of course we have the mallard duck. The mallard duck, there's no problem with its population in North America. It is continuing to expand its range, and you can see them basically anywhere there's standing water, so very much a local duck that you can enjoy from lakes, ponds, and so on. And they do breed. Basically the male stays with the female for one breeding season, and then the following year they find another mate. And then there's the American black duck. The American black duck's numbers are actually declining because of the fact that basically they are the mallards are actually mating with some of the American black duck females, and that's affecting their population. As for gadwalls, there's the gadwall duck, and minks are actually known to eat ducks. They will catch them and potentially try to bring them down. They grab them by the neck, so they are a predator of the duck. And there's the white-winged scoter in the background. So you can see them over the Great Lakes and oceans as well. Basically anywhere there's open water during the winter. Then there's the beautiful and striking hooded merganser, so you can actually see the female in the center there, and then the males with the big hood there flared. There's the common merganser, and then there's the northern shoveler. Tremendous looking bill. They actually get called the mallard duck, but then with the big bill, but they are different. Then there's the blue-winged teal, which are tremendous flyers, and you can see them on ponds, flooded fields in the spring, especially when they're migrating back through from the south. And so that was the blue-winged teal, and then you have the green-winged teal as well. So you can see the green on the head, a little bit of green on the wing, and tremendous flyers as well too. There's the wood duck. You can't miss a striking head like that. It's fantastic. There's another duck called the mandarin duck. Tremendous feathers on the head as well too. Then the northern pintail. I've only seen them in generally small numbers, but they are known to actually group into thousands at times too, especially in migration. Bald eagles will feed on ducks. So when it comes to ducks, the eagle is a heavy predator of them, especially during the winter months. I see it on the Niagara River myself a fair bit, so it is something that they will feast on. And same with snowy owls, especially in the early, or when things start to become harsher inland, they will feed on ducks around the lakes as well as gulls. Then there's the pied-billed gull, or pied-billed grebe, and then the red-necked grebe as well too, which puts on a tremendous display when they are doing a breeding dance. They will actually mirror each other, and it's quite phenomenal to watch. And then there's the horned grebe. The horned grebe is a bird that you can see basically in the Great Lakes during the winter. There's not many of them, but you will get to see some, especially around Lake Ontario, but you can see them in many other open areas of water in North America as well too. So there's the American black duck basically swimming around. And again, you can find them in similar areas as mallards, just I find the numbers are not the same, so you won't have as many of them. And they're very, at least in the country, tend to be a little more skittish, so that's another thing. They're not as people-friendly as, of course, the mallards are. And you can see the common merganser in front, and then we have the ruddy ducks. So you have the ruddy ducks there, along with, of course, we have the hooded merganser. So you can see the females in the front there, and then we have two hooded. And you can see how their crowns are down, so they're not alarmed at that point. You saw that one lift. Well, that's because there's actually a couple of other larger ducks pushing in, which, of course, the mallards. And they can be aggressive, but in this case, there's no hassle at all. And again, this is in a kind of a flooded pond area. That's just, it's spring runoff that's made it swell up so much with more water. And then we have the American coot. And when you look at those feet, it's amazing to see them walk with them, but at the same time, it does allow them to swim quite nicely as well too. So you can see a couple of them here. They will dive for food as well too. And you often see them kind of in the background, just meandering around looking for food. There's a comparison to how large the American black duck is with them. And yeah, so see, here's one walking basically across rocks with those big feet. So it's really always interesting to watch. Horned larks. Well, horned larks are generally the first birds that come back in the spring. We often see them in northeastern North America. I've seen them as early as January, and definitely February is generally when I see them back. And then there's the bobolink. The bobolink is one that you will see in fields, on fence posts, wire, on wires and hydro wires as well too. So there's the female, again, paler plumage but blends in quite nicely to keep the nest hidden. And what I like about the bobolinks is they kind of have that toque look to them. So I kind of think of them as Canadian birds that way. And then we have the gray catbird. And the gray catbird, if you're ever looking in the wood or hear what sounds like a cat in the woods there or a bush, it could be a gray catbird if you don't see a kitty afterwards. Then we have the eastern meadowlark. The eastern meadowlark, there's the western meadowlark, but we have the eastern and eastern part of North America. And then we have the purple finch. The purple finch, it looks very similar to the house finch, but you can see the darker, kind of the purplish eyebrow there. And that, and then there's the female. And so you can see how the female not very often has the color, but then who again wants to be truly that bright on the nest. Then we have the dark-eyed junco. There's actually 4 variations of junco in North America, but we have the slaty back in the east. And they're always a treat to see. They kind of make their pew 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 sounds when they're in your backyard, and they often feed on the ground. Snow buntings, you can see them individually, usually in maybe 2s or 3s, but sometimes you can see them into the thousands, especially in November and December when they're migrating south. You can get very large groups of them, and I've seen them feed on corn seed, but generally it's out in the country. I've never had one at my feeder ever, and so like I said, you can see them in large flocks, and it can be as much as 1,000. They're fun to watch on blue sky days. Then there's the American tree sparrow. And they come back generally in the winter months, so they're often up on the tundra and the Arctic, and then they migrate back south and feeding on berries and other various things. And they do come to the feeder as well too. I find they tend to feed more on the ground, but they will go up onto the feeder as well at times. Then there's the chipping sparrow, which the chipping sparrow was actually the most common in urban areas until the introduction of the house sparrow. So the chipping sparrow is one that is the most common in urban areas. Then you have the field sparrow, and just like its name, I found this in an area where there was an open field, but then was a row of trees there that was able to take shelter in if it needed to quickly. Then there's the Savannah sparrow, very distinct yellow eyebrow, and you can generally see them in open areas as well too, where you have a few fence posts. And then the fields. Song sparrows, there's years where I go around and I see them everywhere. Again, open fields, lake sides, and other areas similar. And so many of them. And then same with the swamp sparrow. And the beautiful white-throated sparrow. It's one that is a real treat every year it comes back in the spring. You can have quite a few of them pass through your yard, and they often will feed on the sunflowers. And there's a tan morph. So you saw the one with the white throat. Here's one more that is a tan morph. So there's 2 variations of the same species. And there's an immature one there too as well. And then there's the white-crowned sparrow. So typically they come back through in the spring and the fall. You get to about maybe 2 to 3 weeks where you get to see them and enjoy them with that crown. It's very distinct and unique compared to anything else that you will see out there. And now we have an immature song sparrow, basically around a kind of a sewage lagoon. And so, like I said, you can pretty much see them anywhere. I've seen them roadside. They have a very healthy population. Then there's the eastern towhee. So the eastern towhee is one that I find beautiful because of that kind of rustic color down the side of its chest there. And they are a curious bird as well too, where you'll see them kind of ruffling, or if you make a ruffling noise in the bush, they will actually kind of be curious enough to come out and try to see what's going on or see what's causing it. Also, they are really competitive. If they have established a territory and then another male comes into it, they will be very aggressive on making sure that that other male knows it's his turf. So I've seen that myself, where 2 males were competing for the same area, and the one that was there that I've been spending time with already did win out on that. So that is the eastern towhee, and it's definitely one worth keeping an eye out for. Generally in the spring is a great time to see them. Then we have our immature birds. So this is your gray catbird. The one before was a northern mockingbird. This is a red-winged blackbird. You can kind of see a red patch developing there, but not quite to that vibrant color. This was an oriole that was trying to feed on peanuts, so it wasn't a very good idea because I actually had to take the feeder down because of the fact that it was trying to, it actually cut its nose or bill a bit just above and that. And then here's a red-winged blackbird, a little bit more mature at this point. You're starting to see a wider area. And then there's the common grackle. The common grackle has these wild-looking feathers, and same with the house finch here. This it is a male, but very wild-looking at this point. And then we're going to take a look here at a great horned owl nest that was originally built by a red-tailed hawk. So the red-tailed hawks usually build the nest, and then they nest in them for a year, and then the following year, the great horned owls are typically back, and they take over the nest. And even if the red-taileds come back, they still maintain the nest. They are the apex predator. So the year after that, the red-tailed hawks rebuilt the nest, and then they had young, and it generally seems to alternate every year, at least at this particular nest. I've been following it for 5 years, and like the great horned owls actually don't add to the nest. They tend to just take it as it is, whereas the red-tailed hawks construct it. So it's kind of a interesting rotation that they have each year. So now we're going to take a look at a great horned owl's nesting season. And so when it comes to that, they can start nesting as early as January. In Wisconsin, I've read that, and myself, I've personally seen it as early as February. And I've seen them in a nest before in December, but they did not stay there. They may have stayed in the area, but they did not stay there. And they are ones that will hunt during the day. They do catch a lot of squirrels. But they also hunt at night, especially around dusk, where they'll set up on a perch and then swoop down and catch their prey. So when there's unseasonable weather or a snowstorm comes in, and while the gray squirrels are basically still gathering food, this female great horned owl has to actually stay on the nest, because at this point there's at least eggs, maybe even really little young ones. So she has to stay on the nest while other birds find protection, and her mate, the male here, can actually put himself on the southwest side corner of the tree where he is protected from those northeast winds, whereas the female does not have that option. She literally has to stay in that nest. Fortunately, in this case, it was just a one-day storm. You can still see a bit of snow in the tree there. And the female is 25% larger when it comes to her size over the male, and that is so that she can cover up the eggs better than and protect them. And even when the young get older, she still has to protect them from inclement weather where it's below seasonal, and that as well too. So we're starting to get to a point where now we can see the female is sitting up higher. So that gave me a good idea that even though I couldn't see the young, the eggs had likely hatched, and they were a few days old, likely, because like I said, she's sitting up higher. So that's a telltale sign, if you can't get a view down into the nest, that there are young in there. So when it came to this, I had 2 to 3 different angles that I could watch from, trying to get a peek at potentially some young ones. But we're now looking at the first week of March, and you can see here where she is now really sitting a lot higher. You can see that is in full protection mode, and now of course we have a little owlet below. So I didn't know how many there were at this point, but it was neat to see that kind of fluffy head with all the down to help keep it warm up there with the mother, because I knew that at least we had one, and generally they will have 2 to 3 per year, and they breed once per year. And so you can see the female still sitting quite high up, whereas the other youngster is sitting out further. I was actually tracking another nest. This one's a little bit further behind, but you can see how much more open, and this one only did have one youngster compared to the nest that we are tracking here, where you can actually see 2. So we're now towards the middle of March, and you're starting to see 2 bodies. You've got the little head kind of peeking through here, and then another one behind. Now they have a very strong instinct not to move, and because of the fact that basically any sort of movement can draw a predator in, and that's basically life or death for them. So when I was in there taking photos of them, you could actually see this one kind of crouched up and played in hide and seek with me, where it's basically behind the tree looking at me. But overall, they will basically stay perfectly still and slowly move over time. So here's a photo of the female looking over the nest. You have the two youngsters below. Often the female was very close to the nest or on the nest, whereas the male, he was anywhere from about 50 to 75 meters away at most, unless driven out by me being around or just other things that were going through, which I never found. Once he got used to me, it only took him a few days to get used to me. He didn't fly off very far, generally maybe another 25 extra meters. And then before long, he was basically just sitting there and wasn't worried about me. So as you can see here, the youngster's kind of looking up and moving its head back and forth. That is their way of kind of getting their depth. So when they're looking up like that, it's there and wiggling their head, that allows them to kind of focus in on what they're looking at, because of course they have a kind of a binocular vision when they are looking at subjects. So anything up close tends to be blurry, whereas in the distance there you can kind of see the head moving back and forth trying to get a better look. And sometimes in that case I think it was more of a stretching out. So you're going to see this little youngster getting quite a bit larger now, and I do a time lapse to show you. This is over 12 minutes, and you can see how it is. The young one is moving. I figured this one was a young female, was moving, but overall was getting smaller, and getting lower and to the surface, but very slowly. Like I said, that was over the course of about 10 to 12 minutes, and that's how little that one moved. And then it came to be around the middle of April, and sure enough, we had a youngster actually leave the nest. And that was a pretty special moment to be able to see something like that, and then to actually be able to find it afterwards. Generally, it's not that far away from the nest. The youngsters will stay very much nearby it because they're not flying at this point. It's more of a hopping and then kind of a clumsy flight. And some actually do get injured when doing this, so it's not the easiest thing to do. We often think of them kind of getting through it quite easily, but it's actually, some do. I have read reports that some do get hurt. Now I was able to get close, but I had to watch for the female as well as the male, and obviously you're not going to hear them come at you with their fringed feathers because they're silent. But overall, I didn't approach too much. I used the lens basically to help bring me in. And I went there in the evening, and then I went back the next day, and the little one was still there, basically, just sitting still right here. So there was about a 2 to 3 day period where we just had steady kind of rotten weather, where it was a cold rain. And I felt for the one in the nest, not much of a cover with that one at this point, but the one in the nest is basically completely exposed. So you can kind of see that very wet, miserable look at that point. So you can see the next day was a little bit drier, and then this was a surprising moment for me. Great horned owls have tremendous hearing. Generally all owls have tremendous hearing, but this one, this female, I was actually able to sneak up on, and you can see that she's heard something, and then all of a sudden she will actually be able to just zero in right on me. So really amazing, because they do have asymmetrical ears that they use for hunting, and basically this allows them to actually be able to hunt by sound, because the sound hits one ear just a fraction of a second sooner than the other, which really allows them to triangulate right on their prey. So now you can see this youngster is actually tucked in under the tree better, whereas this one unfortunately is still in the nest and completely exposed to the rain and looks absolutely miserable. There's a look at the male underneath a large limb on the pine. So their instinct is basically to stay dry, and by doing so they're able to go under large limbs like that or tuck themselves up against a tree like this one here. And again, pines offer the best protection because at this time of year the leaves still aren't out on the trees, which is why they tend to go towards the pines and other trees like that. So there's a great example, and kind of playing hide and seek with me too. And they're quite interesting to watch when they sway in the wind as well too, because of the tufts of their ears, or I should say their horns, and not the tufts of their ears, because that's actually not their ears. And the one is still in the nest. I was actually concerned about it for a while, especially on another bout of rainy days that came near the end before it left the nest, and that was the fact that it wasn't really moving very much, and I thought maybe the cold had got to it because I hadn't seen the mother back to it. She'd only be there for feeding and then basically moving on. It's kind of a way to encourage this one to leave the nest, because this one did seem quite a bit slower in comparison to the first one. The first one seemed to be very direct on leaving the nest. But as you saw there, the other little one did leave the nest finally. There's the female. Or I should say there's the female and then the male before that. And the whole family is basically out at this point. And so it was a real special moment to be able to see something like that, because of the fact that I'd been working with them for a couple months, and to see this all kind of transpire over a period of time was pretty special in that aspect. So you can see this one here is actually doing a little bit of a kind of a popping sound with its bill there. So it's doing a sound, and that tends to be when they're either threatened or it's a call for food at times as well too. At least that's what I saw, because I saw the female at times come in and quickly get food to the little one, and then if I tried to move anywhere, even slightly bit closer, they would take right off. So this was a neat experience here where I actually left the camera behind, and you can see here, I time-lapse it to show kind of a bit of time going by, but you can see the female and then the youngster there, and then also you can see a crow come in above. That one crow, you'll see, becomes quite a hassle in a very short period of time here. But as you can see, this other one wants to get up towards mama because of the fact that this other youngster is being fed and it's not. So higher is better in this case. So this little one's trying to work itself up closer, and you can really see the balancing act there when it is. And here's another great example. So you saw the head wiggle, and then it's basically gauging the depth so it can move up to another limb and continue progressing upwards. And that's for it. Right now, up is better. But here's an example. You can see the crows coming in. You just see a few flying in the distance. So a murder of crows came along. And of course, great horned owls will eat crows. So it's very much in the crow's interest to try to drive them out of the area. And then blue jays too. They don't lack any tenacity. We're basically going in and trying to drive the little one out as well too. But it wasn't too bothered by it, but still enough. It's nothing. Don't want to be pecked in the head there. And then we have the semi-palmulated plover. And so they're in the family of basically the shorebirds, and you can often see them in the flooded fields, and along with other shorebirds, other sandpipers like the red sandpiper, the semi-palmulated sandpiper, a lot of the smaller ones. But you can see here's a great example of the size difference between the sandpipers there and the semi-palmulated plover. And what's neat about semi-palmulated plovers is they actually have a little bit more webbing on their feet, which allows them to stay on the surface a little bit better than when you have when you just have straight feet. So it allows them to stay in kind of muddy areas instead of sinking down so far. And then we have the dunlins, which look almost robotic-like with how quickly they can move their head to strain for food. They're basically looking for invertebrate, insects. I've seen them with worms like the greater and lesser yellowlegs, and that's which you'll see in a moment here. But yeah, it's not uncommon to see basically a mixed flock of them together, and I've seen a field full of about basically anywhere from 50 to 60, and you can have fallout with them, especially around lakes where there was around 1,000 reported on Lake Ontario, and then I'm sure along the Gulf there the numbers are even larger at times too. So there's the greater and lesser yellowlegs. They're very hard to tell the difference between, but generally the greater yellowlegs has a longer bill that is actually longer than its head, whereas the lesser has a shorter bill. And so that's generally how I try to gauge them when I'm out there, or when I look at my photos afterwards. And you can see this one basically feeding on a worm. And so they're constantly searching the water for that aspect. And then there's the common snipe. So this is the same time of year, so March and April basically, and you can see it just in the field there with that very long bill. And they do a little bit of a wiggle here that you're kind of seeing. It almost seems like a little bit of a dance. And the word sniper that the military uses actually stemmed from them, because when hunters would actually hunt for a common snipe, you had to be an excellent shot to actually be able to hit one. And then we have the spotted sandpipers. So this one here doesn't look like a sandpiper or a spotted sandpiper. This is because it's non-breeding season at that point, but you can always tell by that little wiggle that it has when it's moving along as well too. Then there's the northern shrike, which will feed on mice. It'll feed on other songbirds. It's amazing that they can actually carry food in their bill. And here's an example of some of the food that they're looking for, along with hawks, owls, and other species. And that is basically little voles and mice. And it's amazing, since I've started birding, how much more each year I tend to see them in the grass or running in front of me, whereas other years I wouldn't have noticed as much. So the more you're out there, the more you get to see their prey as well too. Then there's the eastern kingbird. If you've ever had a bird swoop at you in your own yard, especially if you're in the country and it's kind of white and black, it's a good chance it was the eastern kingbird. They're very protective of their nesting area. And then there's the great crested flycatcher. So these are a couple that you would see generally in areas where there's can be heavy woodlands, or I've seen them in rows of trees like this one was, just a single row, but that was generally during migration. Then there's the blue-gray gnatcatcher, not very large at all, around 11 centimeters or basically 4.5 inches. And they feed, like the name says, feed on many insects, and often come back just a bit before the bulk of the warblers do. So if you ever see kind of a bluish gray bird that's quite small and that feeding on insects, that's generally them. And then of course there's the golden crowned kinglet and ruby crowned kinglet. They are tremendous. When they flare up their heads, the crown looks fantastic. And then there's the ruby crown. So you can see kind of the yellow, and then you can see the gold there. And the reason why I want to look at the brown creeper again is because of the fact that you can see them. I find it's in the spring that's the best, but I have seen them stay around for winter as well too, especially if there's a feeding station and that in the area as well too. As for the ruffed grouse, where I used to live, there's not as many as there were, because they actually will, at night, when they want to hide or be protected for the night from inclement weather, they will go into the snow head first, and that's the way of hiding. But of course, with more thawing now, that tends to unfortunately injure them or even kill them. Then we have the spruce grouse, and the spruce grouse just a little bit larger than the ruffed grouse, and this one was taken in Algonquin Park. So basically you're looking at boreal forest region when it comes to looking for the spruce grouse. And now I'm going to share some weather with you and birds. Being a storm chaser, I love combining the two. So for example, here's a water spout in the background, and then you have the cormorants flying through. So generally, because water spouts happen in the fall or late summer, early fall, the fall migration is also happening at the same time, so you'll get them pushing through the area too. So right here we're looking at a roll cloud. And this roll cloud separated from a thunderstorm that's around 75 kilometers away at this point. It actually pushed quite a distance. And what you'll find is you'll actually get these birds that are flying up in front of it, because on these roll clouds, the warm air is being pushed up on the front, and then the air behind is sinking. So it's like a free ride, basically. So it allows them not to expel a lot of energy. So we're going to take another look here. So we have the thunderstorm above. Not very much of a storm. There wasn't actually any lightning with it, so it's more of a convective rain. And so as it pushed through, you can see kind of this roll cloud feature show up, and then it kind of dissipates. But it's still moving towards me along the shoreline, and that's when again we get to see this cloud form. And this is right where that roll cloud or gust front basically from that storm has gusted out to me, and what it did is create tremendous lift right along the shoreline. So there was a lot of gulls, I saw birds of prey, all basically kind of riding the wind, and you can see them again off in the distance here. So it had been fairly calm before that, but then as that roll cloud or outflow boundary, which is rolling cold air, came in, that's when they basically were able to stay in flight there with very little effort. So here we can see gulls overhead, and then this is what's called the rear flank downdraft. So it's starting to wrap around the warm moist air going into this supercell, And basically what we're waiting for is a tornado to form. You'll see just a few gulls fly over on the left side of your screen there, and they're basically flying into the inflow. And here's an example of the tornado right here. And so there's your rotating wall cloud and the tornado down to the surface. And then here's me basically running back, or I'm not sure if I'm in this clip. No, I'm not, but I basically ran back from a 125 meter dash at that point. And you can see here, again, cormorants after cormorants after cormorants, and what we have in the middle of the lake there is a convergence line, and that's where these water spouts can basically form. And if you look right along the water there above the surface, you can actually just see the cormorants basically continuing to migrate. And that too. I've also seen birds, when these convergence lines form, turn back around in the morning and basically stay on the shore until it clears off. Here's the long-tailed duck, and you'll notice kind of what looks like a hazy fog move by it there. Well, this is actually called Arctic sea smoke. You can just see how it's moving past the colorful water there and the duck itself. And so therefore, that is basically very cold morning. It was about a 20-degree temperature difference between the water and the air, so therefore you got the Arctic sea smoke. Now we're going to look at a bunch of tail feathers. I wanted to take you through flight shots because it can show us a lot of birds, but it can also show you the process of getting those shots. You always love to have a bird looking at you, so we're kind of going through that aspect right now where it's not looking at me. We have the eastern kingbird here, but you can't see the head. And then of course when they fly directly at you, that's when the depth of field gives you issues, so you get a blurred bird. And then when they land again, it's behind a bunch of twigs. Then there's the goldfinch. So we actually got a nice clear shot. Here's me taking a slower shot. So all I got was the tail feathers basically, but this is where it starts to pay off here. So this is American goldfinch basically just opening up. Same with the female here. So obviously the male again has more vivid colors, but the female is very beautiful herself too. And then there's the gray jay, or the picnic robber basically. And the common redpolls, you can see them in flocks as well too, and beautiful chests, especially on the males. Here's a couple of the barn swallows taking off. So that's when you can really start to get to see kind of how their flight pattern works. There's a partial albino or leucistic American robin. Maybe you saw that earlier with the golden crowned kinglet. And again, the snow buntings in their flocks. That's a great way to get some flying shots. And same with the common redpolls, is having a group of them. And then as soon as they get disturbed by something else, you can try to get that shot and time it. Here's a couple killdeer fighting. And then snowy owls and larger birds are where you can actually get some really nice shots because of the fact that they're slower. You can kind of see them move and get ready, where songbirds are very quick and deliberate on taking off. And then there's the short-eared owl. So you can see that really bent wings as it's really thrusting through the air. Same with the snowy owl here, although this one's starting to use the natural wind at that point to kind of steer it and give it nice speed. This one is hunting, the short-eared owl. And then this red-tailed hawk was right over top of me. I used the car as a blind, so it really gives you a neat open shot of it as well. There's the rough-legged hawk. You can see that brown pattern spiral kind of under the wings there. The northern harrier. This one was flying into a headwind and it landed on that tree, but when they're flying into a headwind, it can give you some nice flight shots because of the fact that they have to work harder and it's generally slower. There's the snowy owl. The more time you get to spend with them, the more the better your shots get to be. So that was one I got to spend time with for 2 months. Then we have the blue-winged warbler. So this is the blue-winged warbler and the Nashville warbler. The Nashville warbler, I generally see a good number of them each spring as they pass back through most of North America on the east side. And then there's the yellow warbler, which comes back in May, and some of them even start going back down in July. So they're not up in North America very long before they start to head back towards the southern U.S., Central Americas, and even northern South America. The chestnut-sided warbler is a tremendous warbler, one that I enjoy seeing each spring, and they actually maintain their color in the fall quite nicely as well too. Then there's the magnolia warbler, another striking pattern along with that brilliant yellow. And then we have the Cape May warbler as well too, tremendous beautiful colors on the cheeks. The black-throated blue warbler, such a contrast and a great one to see in the spring, and they will sing and feed often when they're heading back through on migration as well too. There's the yellow-rumped warbler. This tends to be the one that you'll see the most of, especially in flocks right around the beginning of May around the northeast. You'll see very large groups of them. There's the Blackburnian warbler, one that is very much sought after. This pine warbler was neat because he stayed around all winter, and so did the female. This was in the Niagara Falls area, and there was just plenty of food for them to stick around for. And the palm warbler will actually pump its tail a fair bit. And the blackpoll warbler is one that looks similar to the black and white warbler, but they actually can do their migration in one solid flight, which is absolutely amazing with the distance they have to go from basically the eastern U.S. down to the northern part of South America. Then there's the ovenbird, which is tends to stay on the ground more, and that feeds there as well. And then the common yellowthroat, often found, I find, in swampy areas, cattails. I found them along lake edges with a lot of still water as well too. The striking hooded warbler, and yeah, that is basically gives you kind of that introduction towards the world of warblers, because they are often sought after, especially during the spring migration. So that is today's program. I really hope you enjoyed it, and it introduced you to a lot of other songbirds. For me, my way of helping you is basically to show you them visually, give you a little bit of information, but basically introduce you to them so that you know what to look for out there, because that's ultimately what I want, is for you to experience this. And often I've found my birds just by going on hikes and other various activities like that. So I hope that this has opened your world up to more birding possibilities, and I will be making and exploring the Birds of Ontario 3, and I look forward to sharing that in the future, but happy to share this program with everyone as well too. Thank you so much. Take care.